Alright, the party's over, Season 8. It's time to buckle down and rank your episodes. As per usual, I took all 25 episodes, eliminated 8 right off the bat to get our semi-finalists, and then I went on a series of dates with the remaining episodes until 7 of them stopped calling me back. Or I stopped calling them. Either way, here are my top 10 episodes from Season 8. You know, Treehouse Horror 7 might be the least scary of all the classic Halloween specials. It's not particularly surreal or violent, you know? It's like the really makes you think Halloween special. The Thing and I contains some good atmosphere and a fun retelling of Simpsons continuity. It's kind of weird, logic-wise, how Bart and Lisa seem to hear Hugo in the attic for the very first time, suddenly notice a scar, almost like they woke up in a new reality. These two are fine and all, but we all know that Dr. Hibbert is the real MVP of this segment. The Genesis tub is the weakest of the three, in my opinion, mostly because Futurama came along and ate its lunch. It does contain this awesome visual sequence, and a very funny conclusion. If I'm being honest though, the reason this episode snuck into the top 10 is because of Citizen Kang, which is perfect from start to finish. So many quotable lines here. They did a great job making the political satire timeless and universal, while still leaving us with a snapshot of the 1996 election. Sure, the alien invasion never actually happened, as far as I know, but Treehouse of Horror 7 did immortalize this moment in history. Bob Dole did need this, after all. The Springfield Files is awesome for the sheer amount of variety packed into it. There's something here for everyone. There's observational humor, there's mystery and intrigue, cozy character moments of Homer and Bart bonding, big wacky jokes, and 2 types of guest stars that serve as our referential framing devices. This is a story that goes places, is always ready to cut away to something different or show another character's perspective. Like, you can make fun of how contemporary the X-Files parody was, but it's not like 3 full acts of Mulder and Scully. They get a bunch of solid jokes out of them, and then they go away. They let Leonard Nimoy take over for the ending, and give space for the Simpsons characters to shine. Now, having Mr. Burns roam around the woods doesn't make a lick of sense, even for Dr. Nick, but it's not completely outside the absurdity level of the show's logic. And it's quite clever, using the continuity of glowing green radiation to create such a beautifully mysterious image. The only downside of all the variety is that I don't really care about Homer's journey, nor his conflict with Marge. The situation is too silly to allow for any emotional core, but at least the character arc makes sense, and it gives us some entertaining jokes. And in the end, isn't that the real truth? The answer is no. Homer's Phobia is such a fascinating episode to watch 20 years later. The stakes of the story feel almost quaint, this little character-driven story about homophobia. Feels almost like an All in the Family episode, you know? Instead of taking a more societal or structural approach toward an important issue, it's this laser-focused look at one character's ignorance. This definitely isn't a bad thing. The Simpsons is very adept at these character growth stories to demonstrate a larger point, and that is certainly the case here. John, of course, is like the most charismatic person who ever existed, almost to the point of being a magical plot device, but given Homer's bullheadedness, maybe you need a character in the narrative with a gentle touch. We'll let the reindeer beat up Homer instead. I love Bart's portrayal, how kids at that age instinctively adopt mannerisms of people around them. Kids are impressionable, it doesn't actually mean anything. Of course, Homer's gonna freak out and take Bart through this tour of hilarious moments that inevitably backfire on him. My only knock against it is that it struggles with merging the story about Homer's homophobia with one about accepting Bart for whoever he might be. Yeah, his sacrifice in Act 3 is nice, but it doesn't really answer a question posed by the narrative. We all know that Homer loves Bart. Kinda feels like they wrote themselves into a corner. Still, despite that whatever ending, there's so much excellent commentary and charming character dialogue to Homer's Phobia that is definitely worth a rewatch all these years later. Grade School Confidential might not be the most iconic thing ever in terms of jokes, but it is easily the most sugary sweet episode of the season. Like, that dance sequence in the cafeteria is absolutely breathtaking. makes me want to bask in the warm nostalgia of these two being together. Ah, the good old days. This feels like the kind of story that is easy to mess up, where the relationship feels contrived and arbitrary to the audience. Grade School Confidential avoids these pitfalls thanks to some extremely careful and thoughtful character writing. That these two don't get together because of some wacky inciting incident, or coincidence, that's just a boring kids' party where they have to keep each other company. That we get this prolonged conversation, showing off how awkward and sweet Seymour is, as well as Edna's jadedness and yearning for something more. Then, when Bart enters the picture as a complication, doing a bunch of silly romantic comedy tropes. This sequence of Bart being dragged into the movies is so ridiculously funny and awkward, makes me laugh every single time. It all leads to the aforementioned big moments of sweetness, and a resolution that is equally clever, awkward, and hilarious. And most importantly, Skinner and Krabappel are allowed to stay together, ending with a fake-out that takes advantage of the conventions of the show. That's why the writers love status quo shows. The audience believes anything you tell them. Mountain of Madness has always been my guilty pleasure of Season 8. The whole thing is really, really, really insane, and full of wacky stuff I would normally be shaking my fist at Mike Scully about. But the episode is so darn funny, I don't care. If you love wacky character pairings, this is the episode for you. We've got Lainey and Carl, Smithers and the kids, Marge and the park ranger, and of course, Homer and Mr. Burns. I love these two's evolving relationship throughout the story, that it's not just Burns being awful to Homer for 22 straight minutes. We get moments of the two actually bonding, like you can feel that they have good chemistry together. And even in the face of a crisis, that, in their stupidly imbalanced way, they still make a good team. And then afterwards, watching them go crazy and turn on each other. That's the most important part of being on a team. In addition, you've got iconic jokes like the corpse handling gloves, the parking lot, and this guy. Seriously, this is a top 10 Simpsons joke ever. I will fight people who say otherwise with my army of snowmen. Yeah, Mountain of Madness might be a little too wacky for its own good, might take some jokes too far, but I think its extreme nature brings out the best in its characters. I love how big and bombastic Homer vs. the 18th Amendment is. It's like one of those big issue stories from Season 5, starring Springfield as a whole. The fact that they pick something so old-timey as Prohibition, instead of a heavier topic like immigration, means they can have a little more fun with it. Pack in more jokes, bring in more secondary characters to do what they do best. Guest star Dave Thomas brings so much to the role of Rex Banner, being the over-the-top straight man to an over-the-top situation. Every comedic moment is polarized, this constant clashing of two dramatically different styles and temperament. Homer's bootlegging scheme feels very in character for him, feels like exactly the kind of idea he would think of, yet is just complicated enough for him to bungle his way through. The fact that Rex Banner just can't seem to figure this out makes it all the better. If you're looking for subtlety, or a deep look at an actual issue, you're not going to find it here. That's not the objective of this episode. Homer's final speech should make that evident to everyone. But if you're looking for a raucous good time, Homer vs. the 18th Amendment is the place to do it. You can't have a Season 8 countdown without its biggest party of the year. Confession time. Much like the episode's title, I used to be more divided on this one, but it finally clicked for me recently. First of all, Kirk Van Houten just crushes this episode. I mean, Luann is great too, she plays the foil character well, but Kirk does an amazing job driving the humor here, such as him drawing dignity, his race car bed, I don't recall saying good luck, and of course, Can I Borrow a Feeling? I love how the song kinda starts out okay, as this typical cheesy ballad, but every lyric gets worse and worse and worse. Everything related to the Van Houtens is played perfectly. I used to discount this episode because I always found Homer and Marge's storyline extremely dull. There isn't a strong inciting incident with their relationship that drives any conflict, but I think that's where I was wrong. This approach is compelling because their argument is so minor. Kirk's divorce has gotten into Homer's head, where he's more conscious of his relationship. Showing this flashback contextualizes that this has been a rocky marriage at times. This down-to-earth approach makes Homer's worrying feel all the more realistic. Now, I do think Homer filing for divorce is a pretty cheap attempt for shock value. I think the story still works without going this far, and the beginning is a little slow. But other than that, there is so much to like about A Milhouse Divided. And similar to Grade School Confidential, it lets us bask in the warm nostalgia of the Van Houten's divorce. Ah, the good old days. The Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie Show is an episode I think about a lot. You know, since I talk about The Simpsons on the internet so much. It's kind of crazy to think that this was produced in frickin' 1997. Nitpicky fans have been around forever and ever, but to see this kind of meta discussion before the invention of Reddit and Twitter and whatnot, talk about ahead of its time. But it also feels distinctly retro, that Poochie has become this shorthand for that extreme 90s attitude. A relic that demonstrates that executives will just latch on to whatever is currently in the zeitgeist, without any creative thought or vision. I think getting Homer in the middle of the plot, making him personally invested in his character, keeps the story from becoming completely indulgent. Don't get me wrong, the story is still pretty indulgent. Most all of the animation-centric episodes are, but Homer at least grounds the story. I find the messaging a bit too heavy-handed in places, with characters basically vomiting out the arguments like they're in an Aaron Sorkin show. Is this really an argument that Bart would make in this situation? I won't nitpick this point any further, as I'm already feeling self-conscious about this observation. What I appreciate, though, about the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie Show is that peek behind the curtain, that extra bit of context. I really do feel like I started looking at TV in a different way after experiencing it. Maybe every fandom needs a call-out every once in a while, to keep things in perspective. There is so much going on in Homer's Enemy, I don't know where to start. Much like the previous episode on the countdown, this is a wonderful Season 8 sort of story. How it directly confronts what the writers have created for this world. That such a person like Homer could exist, that he could have achieved so much in his life with this limited set of skills and competency. It challenges the nature of The Simpsons, but from this down-to-earth perspective where we can relate. We've all seen situations like this, known someone who inexplicably slides by. Even the B-plot fits in with these themes, how Bart inexplicably is able to own a factory, and then becomes a Mr. Burns-esque figure, who bosses around others and lacks the willingness or ability to manage people properly. I think it's genius how the episode doesn't explicitly blame Mr. Burns for all these issues. It instead shows how this inherently unfair situation pits ourselves against each other. That it will literally drive ourselves insane if we let it. Hank Azaria delivers his greatest performance in series history here, bringing the perfect blend of anal retentiveness and incredulous disgust. This is a legendary meltdown by Grimy, and Hank Azaria absolutely nails it. Ultimately, Frank Grimes went to war with Homer, but he was actually picking a fight with the Simpsons writers. And buddy, believe me, the Simpsons writers will crush you like a bug. Better luck next time. Hank Scorpio is the man. He lifts this entire episode on his back and carries it to the #1 spot. Look, I don't have to tell you that You Only Move Twice is one of the funniest episodes in the series history. Just look at all these jokes. Look at them. Look at these jokes. There are so many. Here's another. Have you ever seen a top 10 entry devolve into a list of jokes? I love what a change of pace this is for Homer. That he doesn't have to actively drive the story or the humor. That he can instead play this passive fish out of water role, be the comedic foil for the craziness around him. How many episodes can you think of where Homer is always the straight man in the comedy routine? It's a testament to Albert Brooks that Homer is able to slide so seamlessly into this role. I like this clueless and thoughtful version of him. We as the audience can relate to all these new experiences around him, and still laugh at how utterly oblivious he is. That's why I admire an episode like You Only Move Twice, that we get a story so densely packed with jokes, but has a distinctly different flavor than our previous joke factories. I kinda regret pitting this episode against Cape Fear, because I feel like its direct comparison would be Last Exit to Springfield. If you can find a situation where Homer can be one-upped by someone else, you've probably struck comedy gold. Just missing out on this top 10 were El Viaje Misterioso de Nuestro Homer at number 17, Simpsoncalifragilisticexpialidocious at number 16, then In Marge We Trust at number 15, followed by The Old Man and the Lisa, Bart After Dark, Lisa's Date with Density, and finally Brother from Another Series. This was a super close call between these 3 episodes for the number 10 spot. I'm a big fan of Nelson, so my heart wanted to go for his episode. And all that witty Frasier banter between Kelsey Grammer and David Hyde Pierce makes me want to go in that direction. There are just too many iconic moments in the Treehouse of Horror episode to leave it off. And hey, it's currently an election year, so maybe it's top of mind. Politics has certainly been top of YouTube these days. Let me know what your favorite episodes of Season 8 are, and how you would rank them. I think my top 2 are probably on the predictable side. Most people would say Homer's Enemy and You Only Move Twice are way up there. But after that, I have no idea what the general consensus would be. Up next, we have the always controversial and contentious Season 9, full of stolen identities, trillion-dollar thefts, and insurance fraud. Geez, it's like this whole season is one long grift. I feel like we're being punished for partying so much in Season 8. Oh well, it was worth it. As always, thanks for watching.